Hi, thanks for coming. So, real quick, why am I speaking here? I've been a software developer for almost 20 years, so I was still optimizing websites for Netscape. Who remembers that browser? It's been a while. So I've seen the web grown. I've been going through all the cycles from the variables trend to big data to software as a services popping up and scaling until every niche was satisfied. And yeah, I started a couple of companies in the past years. Beginning 2021, I was joining the crypto space. We started building Li.Fi. I'll just touch base on that real quick after this one. We have raised $23 million. We are solving a huge problem in this space, which is all about scaling infrastructure and fragmenting infrastructure and fragmenting liquidity. This is what this talk is about. So we're going to talk about what is the status quo of this industry from a technological standpoint, and how do the solutions look like in order to make it more scalable. Let's quickly talk about blockchains and what they are, just real quick. So blockchains are essentially data structures that give us an idea on how data is about to be ordered, so that at one point people can fetch the blockchain, parse the data, and always end up computing the very same state. In order for that to happen, we need a consensus algorithm, and exactly that consensus algorithm makes it really hard to scale. If you think about a large application like Facebook, Instagram, they have huge data centers just to scale centralized databases. So for blockchains to scale, it's even harder if we have to ask a whole network of nodes to verify each transaction. So in a decentralized system, we have a consensus algorithm that makes a collective decision on whether we append a certain amount of data or transactions to that existing stack of data or not. I was about to talk about app infrastructure cycles. So in general, talking about where are we at right now with this space. So the thing is, we often have that narrative that we need to build infrastructure and tooling first in order to build applications. But in reality, it looks different. In reality, we always build applications that are way too much for existing infrastructure. And that's the problem for infrastructure, because people fall in love with that idea. So new applications that have new necessities in order of scale, they prompt infrastructure providers to actually evolve and get better. So there was a YouTube before YouTube. You just don't know it, right? The light bulb was invented before the electric grid. So these are just examples on this thing. And it's sad to say, but entrepreneurs are the ones that have to suffer through these cycles and have to place a bet whether the technology is ripe or not. We have the very same thing right now. We saw plenty of ventures not being funded last year because venture capitalists had sometimes more in-depth knowledge about where the infrastructure is at, and if a certain idea would have even the potential to scale fast enough and to find enough adoption to make this available business. Entrepreneurs have to figure that out, and entrepreneurs have to figure out the right timing for the application given any underlying infrastructure, and we have that everywhere. This is what we're going to talk about here. So beginning 2022 and end of 2021, we have seen the gas cost spiking extremely high. Gas is essentially what you pay for each computational unit in a decentralized network, and the price per gas depends on the network congestion, like how many people are using it right now. And it's just supply and demand question, so to say. So there's a limited amount of supply a blockchain can give per second, and so people have to pay more if there's a high demand on the network. As a result of that, we see a lot of liquidity, literally billions, flowing out of Ethereum. So Ethereum was the first blockchain that found a tremendous success in terms of adoption, right? Plenty of application, billions of total value locked coming into it. And at some point, gas costs were too high. It was so expensive to just send money around that people were running away using so-called bridges. Bridges are technological middlemen, so to say, that allow to bridge assets and value and data from one blockchain to the other. And we saw a huge outflow of that end of 21, beginning 2022. As a result of that, 2021, Ethereum was really occupying the market share. It was crazy, and now it's down to 59%, and other ones have all the TVL transactions are happening somewhere else, and that's totally fine. That's okay, because Ethereum itself decided the way to scale is multi-chain. So, and what we see right now here, this is a data chart from our company. So what we can see is that transactions are not flowing out of Ethereum, they're actually flowing back and forth from existing layer 2 solutions, so scaling solutions, alternative blockchains, alternative solutions outside Ethereum that are EVM compatible. So what I have to say is that most of these larger blockchains that are around are based on the very same infrastructure as Ethereum itself. So we can redeploy the very same smart contracts on another network and simply separate execution from data layer. And can say, all right, let's simply execute transactions on a network that is not as decentralized and therefore not as expensive to compute, but then use Ethereum back as a settlement layer down the road so that we have one distributed ledger where we all can rely on that data is legit and saved in a decentralized manner. So we see lots of data transaction and value flow between different chains this is just the beginning because that was essentially the biggest hype of 2022. It was about optimistic roll-ups, the idea that let's transact somewhere else outside Ethereum and then roll up all that transacted information, all that packaged data back to Ethereum L1. But it's not enough, right, still. So just having a few networks to compute, if you think about it, Ethereum itself doesn't scale at all for now. There is a technical roadmap that is very promising, but still, so using optimistic rollups, which are essentially centralized instances. So an optimistic rollup is not a blockchain, it's literally one server. It's one API that takes on all these transactions, uses existing data from Ethereum, and then processes transactions and then pushes it back to Ethereum at some point. There are different kinds of rollups. I don't want to dive too deep into it, but that again is not enough. There is an alternative ecosystem called Cosmos, and they had a different assumption. They were like, hey, we should from day one start with a so-called app chain system. So each application would have its own blockchain or its own roll-up solution. So a certain kind of data, whichever data is sensible and accrues value down the line, should be published on that public ledger, or in this case, public instance. And then we would simply treat these optimistic rollups as base layer, and then again it ripples down to Ethereum. And we see, one ahead please. We see these just coming out. So this is the new hype of this year and the upcoming year. So now Optimism, Arbitrum, which are optimistic rollups, they are introducing Bedrock and Orbit. So different ways for companies to have their very own system to get data attached to existing blockchains. The benefit here is simply that you can not only have your own blockchain, but you can manipulate it and adjust it to your own needs. So whether you're a gaming company or an art company, whether you're an insurance company, whatever, you can manipulate this whole thing to a certain extent to fit your personal needs. And now we can make that comparison to existing database economy, because databases, they all can do the very same thing, reading, writing data, but in the end, you pick the system that fits your needs, and this industry is quite diverse by now. So we see the very same technique here. With Optimism Arbitrum, we have optimistic rollups. With zkSync and Starknet, we have zero-knowledge rollups. They work in a different way, and they use cryptography to make things even faster and more scalable. They have some downsides as well, so it's always a trade-off, and it depends on your needs, what to use. And then we have Polygon as its own system, scaling in its own way, just being compatible with Ethereum, but not related at all. But yeah, so we find this behavior to scale everywhere now, and the question that comes up is, well, what do I do with all of this, right? Like, this is so much. It's like, for you to remember, forget it. For you as an application developer, good to know, but like for the end user, and even for companies that come from top, for banks, for custodians, for on-ramps, off-ramps, wallets, all of that is way too much. And it becomes even more complex because now we have the problem, hey, how can we bridge information and data from one thing to the other? How do I get my asset and the value I have on one chain to a totally different chain where I have no way to get to? Like, it's data stuck in this ecosystem again. That's not the idea of a blockchain, right? We don't want to be stuck in silos, and that's where we're coming from. The topic I want to touch base on is essentially bridges. So bridges are essentially the following thing. I'll try to explain it with my hands. All right. So we have a decentralized network here, network A. We have a decentralized network here, network B. So two decentralized systems. And we trust these systems because they are decentralized. So even if one node was manipulated, there are plenty of others that can, in terms of the consensus algorithm, say, well, this transaction is fake, we don't trust it, we don't include it, right? Now, if we are introducing a man in the middle, someone that is like watching both chains could be like, hey, you know what, guys? I have a huge liquidity pool. I have a lot of money on that one chain and on the other chain. So I'll do you a favor. You can send me $10 on chain A, and because I already have money on chain B, I'm going to send you $9.90 because I'm taking a small fee on the other chain. Well, for that to work, we have to trust that man in the middle again, and that's kind of shitty. That's where we're coming from, right? Again, we have a centralized instance. Essentially, that centralized instance could censorship us again, and that's not what we want. So bridges come in all forms and shapes. There are different ideas on how to make these bridging technologies happen. And all in all, it's quite a complex endeavor. One solution to this could be that we simply decentralize the bridge as well as networks in between, as well as the networks it connects. So decentralizing this bridge is essentially means we are building a blockchain to connect blockchains. And the topic we want to touch base on is trustlessness. So in a decentralized system, trust is a difficult word. It works the opposite. So if a system is trusted, it's bad because we have to trust it. So what we want is trust minimization. We don't want to trust it. Now, what all these bridge builders have come up with is the interoperability trilemma. Essentially, when you build a bridge between two decentralized systems, you have to pick 2 out of 3 factors to focus on. The 3 factors are trustlessness, where we are asking, who is verifying this system in between, and what would it cost me to corrupt it? And then we have generalizability, where we are asking, well, what can you do with it? I just gave you that example of liquidity networks where we have a lot of money on chain A and B, and someone in between simply takes your money on one chain and releases money for you on the destination chain. This is a liquidity network, but what if we don't want to just transfer value, but we might want to transfer data, messages? We want to send messages. We want to have complex applications that work on multiple chains for whatever reason, right? At that point, we need generalizability, and that comes at its own costs. It's much more expensive if I have to be able to validate an arbitrary amount of data instead of just sending values across chains. So at that point, yeah, we have bridges, so-called arbitrary data messaging bridges that focus on that one. And then we have extensibility, because right now we are placing a huge bet on Ethereum, but others are placing a huge bet on Polkadot or Cosmos or Solana, and all these other chains have different smart contract languages. So extensibility is simply a bridge making a decision on whether it wants to be compatible with all these other non-EVM ecosystems. And that's just quite tough. It requires a lot of overhead. It's like placing a bet. You invest a lot of money into a future ecosystem that might find as much traction as Ethereum. But yeah, this is how different bridges are picking their battles. In the end, trust is a spectrum, right? From a technological standpoint, we have like 4 major teams here. We can say we can trust humans, we can trust math, we can trust game theory, and we can trust economics, like economic incentives. And in the best case, it's a combination of all of these things. At Li.Fi, we are really focusing on doing a lot of research. We are working together with the IEEE. We are working together with Consensus, which is like the company behind the largest wallet, MetaMask, in the space. And we try to conduct a lot of research on these different systems, and it's crazy. This industry is so fast moving in a way it tries to solve these problems. And even for us as a specialized companies, we are around 40, 45 people by now. Even for us, it's overwhelming to just follow the amount of research and new attempts and approaches that are coming up in this space just to make assets and data bridgeable. One back. So this is just a quick overview. This is already outdated, but this is like a small overview about the bridge landscape and which ecosystems they support. And yeah, that's already way too much. So it's really hard to position Li.Fi in one saying. On our website, we are saying We provide all DeFi liquidity out of one API. For fintech-oriented, for more finance-heavy companies, we are a multi-chain transaction rail because they are used to payment rails as a term. For others, we are just a liquidity layer. But all in all, what we are doing is we are aggregating all these different bridging technologies. We do real due diligence from a technical standpoint, from a human standpoint, seeing who is invested in these companies, are the founders legit. We have dinner with these people and figure out who's the team behind it, can be trusted, because trust is a big topic in this very trust-minimized industry. That's what we are doing, and we were able to possess roughly $2 billion by now over the past 12 months. So we have, so we not only do all that research around it, we also have to aggregate lots of data. If you think about it, we have assets on multiple chains. Well, we have to be aware of these assets, so we have to aggregate a bunch of data sources. So it's a huge aggregation effort on the back-end side. Then the liquidity has to be exchangeable, so we have to connect to all these different decentralized exchanges and decentralized exchange aggregators again, because DEX aggregators are able to split large transactions to reduce price impact across multiple DEXs. Then we have the bridges themselves. Then we have a certain amount of tools like relayer systems, smart wallet systems, and account abstraction systems that are coming up. So, and combining all these things to a very simple API and middleware where TradFi can come in, use us, and simply prototype and build on top of crypto, no matter what that means. This is essentially what we are doing at Li.Fi. So yeah, we have 30 seconds left for questions. So thanks.
So we have one question for you there. What is really the problem you're going to solve?
What the problem is Li.Fi is going to solve?
It's not mentioned there, but you can take a guess.
Yeah, the problem we are solving is essentially what I just mentioned. We have fragmented infrastructure and fragmenting liquidity. And when I say that, it's not just a status quo. It's a process that's happening. It is about to fragment even more. And nice.
Oh yeah.
So back to answering the question. So essentially aggregating all these different solutions is pretty tough. And for companies, it's really hard to place a bet, especially TradFi companies. They are lagging behind when it comes to addressing, to just make a decision on each single part, right? Which blockchain are we touching? Which assets are we touching? And which infrastructure pieces can we rely on? All of that is a lot of overhead, and we simply aggregate all of that, abstract it away, and we make the decisions for you. And that's what large companies and also the largest B2C brokerage apps in this space rely on. So we got lucky and we could grow this pretty quickly.